Going. All right. So here we are again. Now, last week we looked at the very, very specific, the very personal, and the very, very common. That is to say, tefillah and brachot. These are things that we do every single day. There's a teaching that we should say 100 blessings every day. Sometimes you have to go a little extra to find it. Sometimes not. Depends how you count. Tonight, we're going to look at things that happen often just once in your life. And these are the life cycles of a person's life. So rather than going for things that are happening every day multiple times, we're going to look at things that are stretched across an entire life. So Judaism covers both the personal, immediate, and the enormous life-spanning type events. And as we're going to see when we go further on, everything else in between. So life begins with birth. That's not just a catchphrase, that's actually a Jewish principle, that life begins with birth. And we're not going to get into the question of the status of an unborn fetus and all of that, but Jewish law is fairly clear that life begins with the birth of a child. But what happens once the birth has happened? Well, we all know from Genesis, the very first commandment that is given in the book of Genesis, indeed in the entire Torah, that is given to all of humanity, is be fruitful and multiply, right? And that has nothing to do with about growing fruit or about doing math. Being fruitful and multiplying means that you will have children and that you will be able to then expand and allow the world to be filled by the goodness that humanity can make. It's unfortunate that a lot of people don't always fill the world with good people, but that is the goal that God had for us, right? Is it wasn't just about having a nice group of people living in one little corner of the world. It was about having good people everywhere, because when people are doing it right, we are a net benefit to the world around us, right? Unlike other species, which sometimes help or hinder other species, we have the capacity to help the rest of the world be good and take care of the rest of the world. Indeed, that's one of our other requirements. But to do that, we need troops. We need people. So all children are a blessing. Right? Judaism is very clear about this, that every child, boy or girl, is considered to be a blessing. And so we welcome both boys and girls into the people of Israel. Now, the way we welcome them, as you're going to see, is a little different. But there are some common elements to how we welcome both boys and girls in either event. So we have to give them a name. We have to give them a blessing that they exist. But there are also some differences. The most important difference between how we welcome a boy and how we welcome a girl has to do with Brit Milah, which is circumcision. So let's talk about names first, though. From Genesis 29, Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben. Right? Look, a son. Why this particular chapter for my quote? Well, because this is the chapter and section of the Torah where Leah and Rachel are in naming battles. They are each having kids and they're each naming their kids. So there's a whole bunch of names right here, which reminds us that names have special meaning in Judaism, right? Names matter. They reflect our gratitude very often. Again, see Leah and Rachel. They reflect our present. When you talk about Joseph naming his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, it's talking about his status of living in the land of Egypt, of having been sent or forgotten the land of his father. They also reflect our dreams, right? Many prophetic names, many names that prophets give to their children, or many names that they say will come in the future, are very much about the idea that there will be peace, there will be reunification between the people and God, and those sorts of things. So names can talk about both the past, the present, and the future. The structure of a Jewish name, regardless of how you fill it in, also reflects our heritage, our particular link in the chain of Jewish history. Jewish names always are written Ploni, Bar, if it's a boy, or Bat, if it's a girl, Ploni the Ploni, which would mean so-and-so. Ploni is the Hebrew name or the Hebrew word for so-and-so, or John Doe, right? So so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, and so-and-so-ish, miss, right? Technically, it should be Plonit, the female, right? So you have the child's name, the son or daughter of, father's name, and mother's name. So your very name carries in it the name of your parents. And your parents' name carries in it the name of their parents. And your grandparents' name carries in it the name of the great-grandparents. So if you know your parents' name, you know your grandparents. If you know your grandparents, you know your great-grandparents. Each knowing of each of the names means you know the further back, which is why Jews have always been pretty good at genealogy. The Torah itself also reminds us of so-and-so, the son of such and such, as being a very common introduction to a character, or even repeat it throughout their story. Long after we know who we're talking about, we will still often remind ourselves of who this person came from, of who their family is. So that ultimately is how we're going to have everybody's name, is so-and-so, son of or daughter of, and then the parents' names. If you are converting, well, you need a Hebrew name, right? Whatever name you've got right now and that's on your driver's license, great, wonderful, but you're going to need a Hebrew name too when you convert. Those names get to be chosen, right? You get to pick. There are some communities where the rabbi will say, here, have a name, and give you a name. I very much believe that the name should be chosen by the person who is converting. And there are many different ways to choose it. You can choose a name that comes from the Tanakh, from the Bible. Nothing wrong with picking Rachel if you really relate to the character of Rachel, or picking Miriam if you really relate to the character of Miriam, or any of the names of the people in the Tanakh. Although, stay away from the villains, you know. We don't really need a Jezebel. Yeah. The names can also be chosen from history. If there is a particular person in Jewish history that you find outstanding and matches your aspirations, whether it's from ancient history or recent history, you can pick that name. Mm-hmm. It can also be because of a personal connection. If you know somebody who is Jewish and you respect them, or maybe you knew somebody who was Jewish and respected them, you can certainly choose their name. I had one student when I was in Baltimore who very much respected his wife's father, who had long since passed away. And when he converted, they'd been married for some time, but then he decided to convert. When he converted, he decided to choose his father-in-law's name because of the impact that he had had. In many communities, Ashkenazi communities in particular, it is customary to name babies after deceased relatives as a way of remembering them. It is also customary in Sephardic communities to name babies after living relatives as a way of honoring them. Those are two small differences of how Sephardic and Ashkenazic in general pick names. You can also pick a name simply because it is similar to the current name you have. So for example, if your name was David, I would say there is nothing wrong with picking David as your Hebrew name. On the other hand, if your name is Donald, which I don't think has a direct Hebrew equivalent, I could be wrong there, I don't know every Hebrew name, but I've never heard of Donald coming from a Hebrew name, then there's nothing wrong with also picking David as your Hebrew name. Maybe because you find that having the sound at the beginning of the name just makes it sound more familiar and closer to you. Or there could be a meaning to your name. If your name is, well, I'll give you one example I know very well. If your name is Penelope, my wife, then you may find that as Penelope was a weaver and somebody who worked, that picking a Hebrew name that also has a worker connotation, like Amalia, meaning like the handmaiden for God, the worker for God, would be appropriate. And so that can also work off the content of the name, not only the sound of the name. Or you can pick a name for any other reason. It may be just a name that came to you. It may be a name that was of the composer of a famous song that you really like. There's really no end to the name that you can choose, except for your parents. Right? We don't get to choose our parents, as they say, and that goes for people who convert as well. You might be wondering, how am I going to say I am so-and-so, the son of somebody, when my parents, if I converted, weren't Jewish? Well, everybody when they convert gets the Jewish parents of Abraham and Sarah. So everybody is so-and-so, son of Abraham and Sarah. So you can't ask for better parents than that. Right? It's top class, grade A, good ancestry parents. But let's get back to that big distinction, Brit Milah, circumcision. right? We know from the story of Abraham that throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days, right? When a baby reaches 8 days old, we circumcise the baby boy. If the child's not healthy, maybe they were born prematurely, maybe they are jaundiced, or other things that can sometimes be of issue, then we will postpone, right? We will delay the circumcision after the 8th day. We do not bring the circumcision forward, right? If you are thinking, oh, well, it's so convenient, I'm already here at the hospital, let's just have the baby circumcised on day 1 or day 2, that is not a Brit Milah, that is a medical procedure. And if you're not Jewish, that's great, nothing wrong with that. But if you're Jewish, that is not the ceremony of Brit Milah. Brit Milah is not about just about a medical act. It is about the symbol of circumcision going all the way back to Abraham. And so it has to be done on the 8th day if the child is healthy, including even if that 8th day is Shabbat or a holiday. If the baby was born 8 days before Shabbat, even though normally we wouldn't be doing any cutting or things like that on Shabbat, for Brit Milah, it overrides the normal restrictions on Shabbat, because God told us 8 days, and you don't get another 8th day. It's only going to happen once. So if it's Shabbat, it happens. If it can't be arranged on Shabbat for whatever reason, the mohel doesn't live in town, and therefore they're going to have to travel, and there's no way for them to do it on the 8th day, then you can do it on day 9, day 10, day 11, and so on. But it should still be done with speed. It's not something that should ever be postponed. Again, unless there is the health issue for the child. Make sense? Yeah. Does everybody understand what circumcision means? Right, the removal of the extra piece of skin around the end of the male generative organ. Yeah. Okay, good. I don't have a picture. Now, circumcision, as I said, circumcision, as God said, is the sign of the covenant, of the brit between us and God. The word brit means covenant, which is kind of a fancier way of saying contract or open-ended binding agreement between us and God. And the circumcision is a symbol of that. And that means that it is something that we have held on to for more than 3,000 years. And there have been many times in our history where this particular act has often been used as a weapon against us, where different Roman persecutors, different Seleucid persecutors in the time of the Maccabees and other generations have said, you are forbidden from circumcising your sons. And we have said, okay, in public, and then privately gone ahead and circumcised our kids. Because this is such a powerful symbol of our connection to our faith and to our heritage that we have never abandoned it. Again, there's the health of the child. We will absolutely postpone until the child is able to, but just because the government tells us not to, we're not stopping. Right? And there have been many that have tried, and so far, we're still going strong. Any questions on that? Okay. Brit Milah can be done at home, or it can be done at another venue. Sometimes people will do it in the social hall of the synagogue. Sometimes, like I said, people will do it at home. It does not need to be done in a hospital. In fact, if you have a mohel, which is a person who does Brit Milah as a specialty, I have often found that their performance of this act is gentler and less stressful to both the child and the family than when a pediatrician does it who is not trained at doing a Brit Milah. Brit Milah should be a beautiful and gentle act for the whole family, everybody, including the guest of honor, but pediatricians will treat it more as a medical procedure. And there's nothing wrong with that. And for families for whom that is necessary, there are ways to add the blessings to what the pediatrician does. I have helped them do that as well. But it is a lot more comfortable to do it in the privacy of your own home or in the comfort of a familiar synagogue, where you're not stressed by all of the tension around you. And this is not something that you need to worry about. It's not open heart surgery or anything. There are really no complications that are likely to happen at the moment. And every mohel that I know has always used sterile equipment and sterilizing actions. and made sure that there was never a problem.
This question
Yeah.
regarding the mohel.
Yes.
This person is studying and specialized, but is certified.
Yes.
From the what?
Well, from different agencies.
Community,
So
yeah.
the conservative movement has a way of certifying people to be mohalim, and Orthodox communities have their own system as well. But yes, it does involve specialized training, not just in the medical procedure, but also the liturgy, the prayers that are said, and the way the ritual is conducted, in order to make sure it also matches Jewish law. So yes, it is. Not everybody who knows how to do circumcision knows how to do a brit milah. And there are some people who know how to do a brit milah, like me, who doesn't know how to do the medical side of it. Right? So don't hand me a knife. I won't know what. I won't be able to handle the procedure properly. But I can tell you when the procedure is done properly. And a moil can do both, right? Understands the halakha and understands the practical mechanics, so that they can do it properly for the child. Not at all. Any other questions? Again, we're just skimming the surface of the detail. There's always more that you can learn about each of these different topics. But that's the general overview of Brit Milah. If you are converting, if you happen to be a man, guess what? Yeah, as part of being the Jewish people, you are also going to need a circumcision. And that means that if the male person is not circumcised, that they will need to be circumcised before the conversion can be finished. And that's a more complicated procedure if you're an adult than if you're 8 days old. It's a lot easier when you're 8 days old. But this is something, as I mentioned at the bottom, that I can help arrange to be done. And there's a urologist that I've worked with that can make sure this is done both comfortably for the man as well as according to Jewish law. And it's not a major procedure. It's just one that most of us are comfortable considering if we don't have to. But this is required for conversion for men. If the person has already been medically circumcised, in America, last I heard, something between 60 and 70% of boys born in America are circumcised, even if they're not Jewish. And so if you were circumcised when you were a boy, and now you are an adult and you want to become Jewish, great. It's already been removed, so you are really close. But that was only medical. We need to still do the brit part. We still need to do the covenant part, right? The circumcision's done, but the covenant hasn't happened. And so therefore we do an act called hatafat dam brit, which I think I wrote there. Hatafat dam brit, where you take a small pin or lancet, or like for like blood testing, you know, the little thing, and it's placed at the site where the foreskin would have been had it still been there, and it's a little poke, and a small drop of blood comes out, and we're good. Right, and
not over here. This is at the synagogue.
No. We still do this. Usually, we still do this with the doctor or a moil to take care of that. Yeah. Oh, in private. Yes, in private. Well, there do need to be 2 witnesses.
Yes.
But the witnesses have to be to the act and to the blood. It's not like they're like, oh, yeah. No one's taking pictures or.
It's very private.
It's very private. Yes. But it does need to be. You know, we do have to make sure that it happened. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you're a girl, just go. Phew.
Yeah, lucky.
Yeah. But the hatafat dam brit, the small taking of the drop of blood, it takes 5 to 10 minutes, maybe. It's very, very quick. And from I've never had it happen to me, but from everybody that I've talked to, it is painless. It is you know, less than getting your skin pinched, because it's happening in a place where actually there aren't a lot of nerves right there, and it's not deep or huge or anything. It's literally like putting a small dampening of blood on the cotton, you know, to show that there was a drop. Right? We don't need to fill up a jar. If there is a baby girl born, we have a procedure called a simchat bat. Now, Simchat Bat literally means the celebration of a girl or of a daughter. In the Torah and in the Mishnah, the Talmud, and Halakha, there is no direct mitzvah that says you must celebrate the birth of a girl, but every family is happy that a girl was born. And so there is still a celebration. But because there's no mitzvah, it doesn't tell us what day it has to happen on, right? Boys, we know 8th day with a few exceptions. For girls, well, the Torah doesn't tell us. So there are many different customs in many different communities, both Ashkenazic and Sephardic and Mizrahi. And even within those communities, they have a lot of different variation of how they choose to celebrate the birth of a girl. For some, they will invite the family to the Torah for an aliyah. So regular Shabbat morning, sometimes a week or two, sometimes a month or so after the baby girl was born, they will come to synagogue, they'll come up to the bima, and there will be a ceremony, a mishaberach, at the bima for celebrating the birth of the new girl. Some will have big feasts and parties, just like you would have for a brit milah. And so you'll have the girl, and there'll be blessings, and there'll be prayers and songs or whatever you like, just no circumcision. But everything else is the same as you might expect from a brit milah, because all of them will include the giving of a name, the giving of blessings, and a lot of celebration, a lot of gladness. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, but you can see that when we don't have the specifics of the mitzvah, you end up with a lot more variety in different practices, because we don't have a benchmark of what we have to do. So that means there's more creativity in how this happens. I remember that I had a lot more trouble preparing for my daughter's birth than for my son's. Because for my son, there's a script, right? I know exactly what's going to happen, right? He's born 8 days later, actually a little bit longer for him because he had jaundice. We have the brit milah, and when the brit milah happens, I know what the moil is going to say, I know what I'm going to say, and I know what's going to happen, and then we all eat. For my daughter, I had to go looking for this ceremony, that ceremony. I like this quote. I don't. This quote I prefer. This. I had to create something. There was a lot more variety. Okay, Pidyon Haben. 30 days after the birth of the firstborn son, there is a ceremony to redeem him. This is in keeping with the idea from the Torah that the firstborn of every creature, right, human and non-human, belongs to God. And this is also a reminder of the plague in Egypt where the firstborn were spared. Remember, God said there'll be a plague that will destroy all the firstborn, but our firstborn weren't. So it wasn't that God said, I'm going to destroy the Egyptian firstborn. It was God said, all the firstborn are going to be destroyed, and then he protected ours. So because of that, the firstborn have a special connection of feeling having been protected and saved, and therefore they need to be redeemed from that obligation to God and to God for their life. So that means that there's a ceremony that happens with the Kohanim, with the Kohen, somebody who is from the Kohen lineage, where there is an exchange of shekels, of some silver coins, in order to redeem the child from God. And there are a lot of details of who you need to do this for, because just being firstborn son is not enough, right? So first of all, if there is an older sister, then it doesn't matter when the first boy comes along, we don't do the ceremony. If it is a cesarean, we don't do the ceremony. If it is the firstborn son to the father, but not the firstborn child to the mother, maybe they've remarried or something, then we don't do it, right? So there are a lot of details of who qualifies for needing this ceremony. So if you are expecting a boy and it's your first, contact your rabbi.
Even if there's been a miscarriage before.
Some miscarriages.
Oh,
It depends on how far along the miscarriage was.
Oh,
yes,
wow.
Exactly. That's why, like I said, there are details that if you're expecting, double check with your rabbi to make sure the ceremony can happen. And probably you'll need the rabbi's help in finding the Kohen to help you with the ceremony. Coming of age. Now that we can get away from being a baby, let's talk about being 13. Pirkei Avot gives us this lovely line that at the age of 13 is the age of mitzvot. That becomes the age of commandedness. A child, and that's say younger than 13, is not considered legally responsible for his or her actions, right? If a 8-year-old is playing in the yard and they hit a baseball and it goes through the neighbor's window, we are not telling her that she has to go to jail for breaking someone else's property. We're not going to make her, work in the factory to pay off the cost of the window. We're going to go to the parents and say, hey, mom, dad, your little girl broke the neighbor's window. You've got to fix it. Well, that's not just for law. That's also for spiritual law, for halakha. If a child eats something that isn't kosher, if a child breaks Shabbat, we don't say that that child is a sinner and is now incurring the guilt and wrath of God. We say that child is still learning. That child is still a child. When they hit the age of majority, when they hit the age of mitzvot, now they are kind of on the books. I mean kind of, because at puberty, they're held responsible by the human courts. This is a concession, because according to the Torah, really the age of full maturity is 20 years old. But if you wait until someone is 20 before you can prosecute them for stealing or prosecute them for murder, I know a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-olds that would probably abuse that loophole. And most 16, 17, 18-year-olds back in the day, they were already planning to get married, set up their own families. We had to respect legally by the human standards that they were acting as adults. So once puberty comes along, the human court will hold them responsible for crimes that they might commit. But we know that the heavenly court still looks at them and says, yeah, but they're learning. And so their mistakes at that age are more easily forgiven by God. But the community has a responsibility to hold a standard, even for someone as young as 13 or 12, because boys and girls do mature at different speeds. And that was true in the ancient world, and that is true for today as well. So a girl becomes responsible for the commandments when she is 12, and a boy becomes responsible for the commandments at 13. Does that make sense? I know that distinction between the earthly court and the heavenly court often confuses people, so I just want to make sure that we're got that. Okay. So you will hear people talk about having a bar or bat mitzvah. Grammatically, it's not exactly correct, but we say it anyway, so just put up with it. Right, because a bar or bat mitzvah means a child. Having a bar or bar mitzvah, usually what people mean is having the ceremony that marks when the person is that age. How does that work? Well, when someone wants to celebrate the coming of age, our youngsters demonstrate their knowledge and enthusiasm by leading the community. They lead services, they read from the Torah and the Haftorah, and they perform other mitzvot publicly as well. This is their way of saying, I am old enough to be responsible, and I am willing to take on that responsibility. Judaism celebrates at different milestones the gaining of more responsibility, which is a little different than American culture, where we celebrate at different milestones the gaining of more freedoms. Nothing wrong with the American system, but I also think that we need to make sure our kids celebrate their responsibilities, not only celebrate their freedoms. It's important to make sure they know that both are important for being a full human being. In our congregation, meaning Temple Israel, boys and girls have this ceremony at 13 or slightly older time in their life, and that way we ensure that both boys and girls get equal instruction. There is an unfortunate tendency among many families that once the child has had the bar or bat mitzvah, they stop coming to school, right? They think, oh, we've had the ceremony, we're done. It's really supposed to be the beginning of their more advanced Jewish education. But unfortunately, a lot of parents, because of the multiple priorities and pressures they have in life, will choose to stop sending their child after that year of bar and bat mitzvah to any more religious education, formal religious education. So if we gave girls their ceremony at 12, then that would mean that they would, on average, stop coming when they were 13. And if we did that, then girls would always be 1 year less in their education than boys. And so we hold both boys and girls to 13 before we give them the ceremony. Girls are technically a bat mitzvah at 12, but we do the ceremony a year later in order to make sure they get more education for the rest of their life. You will also notice that people have parties. The party is part of the mitzvah of the celebration, but unfortunately, a lot of parties can get a little excessive. When I was in Los Angeles, people would spend, you know, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 on the bar mitzvah party. It was absolutely crazy and often completely twisted what the whole moment was meant to be about. The most famous one when I was there was when one family hired the Laker girls to come dance for the bar mitzvah boy. That is not what being a bar mitzvah is about. Right? I don't care how much you like basketball, that is not what it is about. So sometimes the party completely overshadows or even, like I said, warps what the ceremony and the moment is meant to be. There is nothing wrong with simply having a lovely little reception after the service. You know, so raise a little glass to l'chaim, have a little nosh with your friends, maybe, you know, dance a little bit. That is plenty for anyone to celebrate. Anything else, you know, measure carefully.
Yeah.
The next major event in a Jewish person's life is usually their wedding, right? This is the one that we can't schedule precisely. I can tell you when we're going to have Brit Milah, 8 days. I can tell you when we're going to have Bar Mitzvah, 13 years. I can't tell you when someone's going to get married. But the wedding does have a very definite pattern. We will have a class later on where we're going to go into the details of the wedding in a lot more detail. We're going to go over the particulars much more carefully, but I do want to give you a general view of how this fits into the overall life cycle. So again, going all the way back to the book of Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. This is sort of the introduction when God explains why he made men and women, why he made couples in the first place. You know, why not just make us like an amoeba? And we can just go through life, and when we want to have children, we just, you know, grow a new arm and it turns into another human being. Well, God felt that it was important that we have a coupling process, that we have pairs in order to have this relationship. So Judaism believes that marriage is a beautiful way to bring two souls together, to build a home and a life that would be impossible without the other half. The husband and wife are meant to love and respect each other, and the ceremony is quite simple. We'll talk about marriage a lot more, but for now we're just talking about the wedding. Right? I always say that if people spent as much time planning their marriage as they do planning their wedding, they'd have a lot happier marriages. Because a lot of people really obsess about every detail of this color and that color and what type of dress and what kind of tuxedo and all of that, and they never think about what happens the next day. The next day is the rest of your life. But for the ceremony, as you can see, Judaism makes it quite simple. The ceremony has two main parts. It has the betrothal, also known as erusin, and it has the blessing or nisuin, which is the final stage of the marriage. Together, we refer to the ceremony as kiddushin, or sanctification. In the ancient world, these used to be two separate days. We used to do the betrothal, just like in modern American culture, where you do the whole engagement thing, and then you do the wedding part much later. But over the centuries, we have learned that if you do the betrothal and then you do the actual finale of the wedding, that there are problems that creep up in between, right? Maybe there is a war, maybe there is a famine, maybe there is a disease, maybe there is poverty, and then you can't actually fulfill the initial promise you made of being husband and wife. So we have now taken to having husband and wife both get engaged and finish the engagement with their wedding right under the same chuppah, the same canopy, on the same day, within a few minutes of itself. In the old world, you would do the betrothal, and then the man would go and prepare his home to receive his wife and build, you know, the life together. Nowadays, we do that all at the same time.
And when they did it those days, if they wanted to break off the engagement, they needed a divorce.
It was a full divorce, exactly.
Divorce.
Once the betrothal takes place, once erusin takes place, which is symbolized by the giving of the ring, once that happens, you have all the responsibilities of being married with none of the benefits. Right? So if you decide that, you know what, I don't want to actually go through with this, you have to get a formal legal Jewish divorce, which we'll also talk about in a later class. And you know what, it's much better to just put the two parts right next to each other and avoid that weird in-between time. where you're kind of responsible, but you're not like, if you were to cheat on your fiance under Jewish law, that's considered adultery. It's not just considered a bad idea. I mean, it is a bad idea, but not only a bad idea, it's actually adultery. So we take out that window in between and we do them right at the same time. So let's take those in two different pieces. Erosin, we welcome the bride and the groom into the chuppah. Again, we'll go into more detail of the other elements at a later class. And we do a blessing over a cup of wine. We always have wine as a symbol of joy at all of our joyous occasions. If you are allergic to wine or have other reasons for not using wine, grape juice is a fine substitute. Blessed are you, Lord our God, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us regarding forbidden unions, and who forbade betrothed women to us, meaning there are some people we're not allowed to marry, right? Like, my sister. I don't actually have a sister, but God told me I can't marry my sister. God also told me I can't marry someone else's wife, right? So God did tell us that there were limits on who we were allowed to marry, but God also permitted to us those married to us by chuppah and kiddushin, by this act of the wedding. So it isn't that God only said, no, no, no. God said, not this, but yes, that. And we are thankful that even as God said no to these, God did say how we could have this joy of being together. Praised are you, Lord, who sanctifies his people Israel with chuppah and kiddushin. We'll come back again to the word chuppah near the end, but kiddushin, again, is the name for the whole ceremony of the wedding process. Good. The second part of Erosin, the part that is most famous in most people's minds, is the giving of a ring. The groom offers the ring to the bride, and he recites the following formula not in English, but we usually will have him say it in English as well. Behold, you are consecrated to me by this ring, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. In a traditional Jewish ceremony, there is no do you take blah, 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 and all of that, and I do. We don't have that in a Jewish ceremony. If you want to have that, you can have the creative vows and do all that kind of thing you want, but you also have to have this as part of the ceremony. The groom presents the ring. The bride shows her agreement by allowing the ring to be put onto her hand. If she doesn't want to marry him, she is absolutely allowed to say, no thanks, and then there is no marriage. I know that a lot of people think of Jewish weddings, they remember Fiddler on the Roof. And if you've ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, it makes it sound like you can force a girl or a boy to get married against their will. That is not Jewish law, right? Yes, it was true that many parents would arrange for a marriage to happen for their children when they grew up. But when they grew up, the boy and the girl both had the right to always say, Papa, I don't want to marry that person, and to say, call it off. So she also has the right to consent. And in most modern ceremonies, you will find that a bride will also choose to give a ring of her own to the groom. It's very important that this isn't seen as being an exchange of rings, right? Because we call that a trade. This is not a trade. These are two separate gifts. He is giving her a gift, and she chooses to accept it as a symbol of being married. And she is giving him a ring, not in exchange for the one that he gave, but giving him a ring because she also would like to give a gift as a symbol of their getting married. It is now customary to read the ketubah, which is the marriage document that I will explain in a moment. But before we get to that, we have to get to part two, nisuin. This is the end of the wedding ceremony. And the nisuin is recited, is the main focal point of it is what is called the Sheva Brachot, which literally means 7 blessings. I know, we're not creative in our naming. Number 1 blessing may sound familiar. You are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, who created the fruit of the vine. This is the same blessing we say over a cup of wine when we're just having a cup of wine. Same first blessing we say before drinking a cup of wine when doing the Kiddush on Shabbat. It's also the same blessing we said way back at the beginning when we did the betrothal ceremony of Erosin. But we go on. You are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, who created everything for his glory. So we're saying that the way God created the world was done in a way that brings glory and honor to God. You are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, the creator of man, meaning humanity. So in addition to God creating everything, we are also saying that the way God created human beings is also an amazing, amazing thing. Why? because you are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, who created man in his image, in the pattern of his own likeness, and provided for the perpetuation of his kind. You are blessed, Lord, creator of man. So there was something special about the way God created humanity, which is described in the Torah in the first couple chapters very profoundly, which is to say that we were made b'tselmo, in God's image. And that means that we have a special spiritual capacity. And in addition to that capacity, God also made it possible for us to make more of us, which is a kind of shared creative power, right? God is a creator of the universe. We are a creator of our children, of our species. And for that, we are very thankful. We then continue where we say, let the barren city be jubilantly happy and joyful at her joyous reunion with her children. You are blessed, Lord, who makes Zion rejoice with her children. This is where we say, it's amazing that God created all of the world. It's amazing that God created humanity. It's amazing God created humanity with this special knowledge of being created in God's image. And it's amazing that God is creating joy for the Jewish people. So you can notice that there's a pattern to the way these blessings are narrowing down into being more and more specific of what we are celebrating. And in this one, though, we are still reminding the bride and groom and everyone else that their joy is our joy, right? It's not only the bride and groom that are happy. We are all happy that they are getting married, because the union of any two Jewish souls is a celebration for all the people of Israel, no matter whether we know them or not. Number 6, let the young loving couple be very happy, just as you made your creation happy in the Garden of Eden so long ago. You are blessed, Lord, who makes the bridegroom and the bride happy. And now we come to the bride and bridegroom themselves, right? So all of creation, all the way down to this couple, we are hitting all the blessings from greatest to most particular, or most general to most particular. And now we are finally saying groom and bride, that they are happy, but notice that they are happy in their own way. Bridegroom and bride happy, each are happy. When we get to the last one, we're going to see they're now happy as one. So we are narrowing it down to them, from the two of them to the one of them, to the union of them, to our final union, which is number 7, and the longest blessing. You are blessed, Lord our God, the sovereign of the world, who created joy and celebration, bridegroom and bride, rejoicing, jubilation, pleasure and delight, love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. We are thanking God not just for creating the universe and all the bits in it and all of our place in it, but for creating it in a way that we can be happy in all of these special moments of our life and all these special relationships, and that all of these should be connected to how we relate to our spouse, right? I should feel rejoicing and jubilation and pleasure and delight and love and brotherhood, peace and friendship with my spouse, because they are the person that I should share most deeply all of those emotions. Some of them, like, friendship, we can share with other people too. But I should have these with my spouse. And then we go a little bit broad again. May there soon be heard, Lord our God, in the cities of Judea and the streets of Jerusalem, the sound of joy and the sound of celebration, the voice of a bridegroom and the voice of a bride, the happy shouting of bridegrooms from their weddings and of young men from their feasts of song. Right? This quote from the prophets is trying to say that what if you wanted to imagine a symbol of joy, the best symbol you could ever take is the joy that comes from being a bride and groom on your wedding day. Ultimately, we hope that joy is the joy the whole world feels at the coming of Mashiach, at the redemption of the world, at the making of the world perfect and whole. And so we're basically saying to people, you see how you feel right here at this moment as you were about to get married? Hold on to that, because that's the dream for the whole world 24/7. We're not there yet, because no one feels quite like they feel on their wedding day the whole rest of their life, but that's the goal, and that's what we're using as our symbol. And then we finish, you are blessed, Lord, who makes the bridegroom and the bride rejoice together, right? And so we've gone all the way from all of creation down to individual bride and groom, down to them blended together as one. Make sense? Okay. The ketubah. The ketubah is often called a marriage contract. That isn't technically true. The ketubah is, in fact, more akin to what we would call in America a prenuptial agreement. It is a marriage contract in case the marriage breaks. Now, there's two different ways a marriage can break. There can be divorce and there can be death. In Torah, a woman does not inherit from her husband. Right? The form of property that everybody had in the ancient world was land. Land was allocated by tribe. Tribe was determined by the father. That meant that my farm needed to stay with my tribe. So if I die, the farm needs to go to my son, or the farm needs to go to my brother, right? Or my father if I don't have a brother, or to my uncle, or to my cousin, but some male relative to keep it in the tribe, or else the balance of the tribes will get out of whack. That means that in the ancient world, a woman was not protected in case her husband died, and she had nowhere to go. So the ketubah was created so that if he dies, she would be able to inherit from him off the top of his estate enough money to live on, to have that as a stipend. So too with regards to divorce. In the Torah, there is nothing in the Torah about a woman being given any sort of settlement at the time of a divorce, but the rabbis recognize that puts women in an incredibly vulnerable position in the ancient world where they had very little earning power on their own. And that meant that women would be reluctant to get married because why should they leave the safety of their father's home, the safety of their brother's home, where they knew that there was someone who had a constant obligation to them rather than a how do I feel to get hit to the obligation. And so the ketubah also prevents her from being kicked out of her husband's home and left penniless to be homeless on the streets. So the ketubah was very important for helping to ensure that there would be financial security for women who in the ancient economic system were incredibly vulnerable. And this is one of the places where the rabbis talk about tikkun olam in a way that may be different than the way we hear it today when people use the phrase almost like a catchphrase. But this is a real step of creating a justice system that will protect everyone. Chuppah, last but not least. Right, the chuppah is now what we call the wedding canopy. The wedding canopy is a space that is created and under which you have the ceremony. And according to halakha, this is a zone where we are able to perform it. It symbolizes as well the home that the couple will build. It is also a reminder. In the ancient world, the chuppah was not a freestanding canopied space. The chuppah was a bridal chamber. It was a special room. After the ceremony, the bride and groom would go there and they would do what men and women do together for the first time. And that would seal the deal, consummate the marriage, if you will, physically. And nowadays, we don't have that kind of custom. We do still give time for the bride and groom to be alone after the ceremony to have a little moment of peace and privacy before going on to the party. But we don't expect there to actually be consummation during those minutes. But in the ancient world, there was a special time set aside for that consummation. And that would then be the end of the ceremony. Is it a question?
No.
Okay, got it? Okay. Any other questions then? Because that is going to wrap it up for us
Does that
tonight.
symbolize their home?
Yes.
Which is open to, like Abraham open to the strangers?
So there are so many ways to symbolize the modern structure of a chuppah. The idea of being open like Abraham to the north, the south, the east, and the west on the four sides to anybody who may come, that a home should always be hospitable, is a very common interpretation of the symbol. Another way of describing it is that there is a statement that since the destruction of the temple, where we had a space for sanctity, now we only have the 4 amot, the 6 feet of halakha of space, meaning the area around us that we are able to influence by our keeping of the commandments. And the chuppah represents that zone of influence of, as I keep commandments, especially in my most intimate and passionate of moments, I am actually creating room in the world for God's presence. And it's also kind of a homestead symbol of saying that no matter where we were, even when we were in oppressive countries that didn't give us much freedom, between these poles here under this space, this might as well be our home. This is our territory, our turf. We're doing this our laws, our ways. And yeah, we're going to have to take it down because they won't let us keep it forever. But for this moment, we are free to do it the way we want to make our relationships the way we want. So there are many, many symbolisms for the modern form of the chuppah, and all of them are beautiful. Any other final questions on these life cycles? We will cover death and mourning and burial and all of that part of life another class, because it's too long to go into with all of the rest. And like I said, we will loop back to go into marriage and divorce in more detail, so that you can get a better sense for all the aspects of the ceremony and how it works. Okay, great.